Hey everyone, this is Paul Hutchings coming to you with another episode of The Good Parts, a daily social media show where I go live once a day, Monday through Friday, to share one good part from my life and or business in an effort to share things that I'm learning that are inspiring. And also, in that process, I want to do my best to help myself and others move towards more freedom, prosperity, happiness, and goodness. And in today's episode, I want to share with you about history's forgotten hero, and specifically a powerful lesson contained within the story of history's forgotten hero. So I'm going to ask you the question to start off. Did you know that there was a boy named Helmuth Hübener who was 17 years old who was executed by beheading by the Nazis, and that this boy was the youngest person ever to be executed by the Nazis? Have you ever heard this person's name? Helmuth Hübener. I had not. I was out at my in-laws this last week, and it was Sunday. Hey, Nick, good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. If you're watching live or on the replay, say hello. I'd appreciate it. I was out at my in-laws, and my brother-in-law mentioned this name, Helmuth Hübener. And so I looked up the name on the internet and started to learn a fascinating story that I think deserves to be not forgotten, deserves to be remembered. There's probably a myriad of lessons in this story, but there's definitely one that I want to highlight that I think can be very inspiring, and also I think can inspire more courage for us in our daily lives and our businesses and the things that we're doing as people on planet Earth on a daily basis. So Helmuth Hübener, I want to tell you a little bit about this person. So he was in Germany. Weimar, I think, was the place that he lived. And this was when Hitler started to take power in Nazi Germany. And there came a point as a young man where he was actually a church-going kid, and he started to hear facts that were, hey, Ron, he says, my dad was born in Blackfoot. Really? Wow, that's crazy. What a small world. Very cool. Where's he at now? Is he still in Blackfoot? Do you still have any relatives here? So anyway, this Helmuth Hübener, he started to hear ideas that were contrary to the propaganda that was being saturated throughout the German people's minds on radio and newspaper. And in fact, there came a point where he got access to a radio. He fixed it. It was his brother's radio, and he started to tune into the BBC. There were broadcasts from the BBC that were doing broadcasts in the German language. And so this information that Helmuth was receiving was contrary to what he was hearing from his government officials in Nazi Germany. And what he quickly came to believe was that the German people were not getting the information that was accurate. Instead, they were being fed lies, and they were missing out on a whole bunch of information that you would call true and accurate. So that's one part of the story, is he started to learn that there was another side of this thing, and he became concerned that he and his family and people around him and his local community were not getting the right information. The other thing that happened is he was attending this church that he'd been a member of, I believe, all of his life. His mother was a member. His stepdad was, I'm not sure if he was or not. His stepdad was a Nazi. But anyway, he's attending this church, and there came a time when a sign was placed on the door to the church that no Jewish people were allowed in the church. And this really bothered him. Ron says he passed. I have some relatives in Idaho Falls and Rexburg. Cool. Yeah, that's my stomping ground. That's awesome. Where do you live now, Ron? I'm curious. So anyway, that really bothered him. Those two things bothered him. That Jewish people were not allowed into the church. That conflicted with his ideas on what it meant to be a Christian, which he was a student of Christianity. He was a Christian. He studied the Bible, and he said, this is not right. And his local leader of his congregation, again, as I mentioned, was a Nazi. So Helmuth had a choice. He could either not say anything, not do anything. Now, keep in mind, he was a young boy. I'm not sure if he was 15 or 16 or somewhere around that age. He could keep his mouth closed and not say anything, or he could choose to do something about it. What Helmuth decided to do was he decided to use the typewriter excuse me, that he had in his home to type up leaflets printing out the information that he was receiving from the BBC that was forbidden. He was not supposed to be listening to this information. Ron says, Las Vegas, I grew up in Salt Lake City. Cool. Well, it's super nice to meet you, and I'm glad you're here today, Ron. Thanks for tuning in and saying hello. So Helmuth started to type up the information that he was receiving from the BBC, knowing that if he got caught, he could be punished by death. He recruited a couple of his friends to help him from his local church. So at night, he would go into his room, he would pull out his typewriter. Hey, Veronique, good to see you. Pull out his typewriter, type up the information that he was receiving, and then he would pass them out to his friends, and then they would go place these pamphlets all over. And they were saying things that were very heretical to the German establishment, like Hitler is a murderer, things like that. And so what ended up happening was there came a point when Helmuth had the idea to begin translating these documents into French, because they had some people, I guess, that spoke French in their local area that they wanted to get this information to. And his friends said, well, number one, you don't speak French, and number two, it's dangerous to do this. But he said, I'm gonna go ahead and do it. Well, while he was in the process of, I don't know what he was doing, like copying one of his friend's translations, someone who was a member of the Nazi Party noticed that he was doing this and reported him. So Helmuth got reported to the Nazis. So now here is Helmuth, a 17-year-old kid. I want you guys to keep this in mind. 17 years old, about the age of my oldest son. He goes before this judge in this court. They called it the People's Court. And what the People's Court decided was that his crimes were so grievous and treasonous that he deserved to be punished with death. And before the judge, Helmuth uttered these words. I want to read these. I wrote them down. He said, "Now I must die, even though I have committed no crime. So now it's my turn, but your turn will come." He said that as a 17-year-old boy to the judge. And then what ended up happening was they cut his head off and killed him, and he died. And before I share with you the hidden lesson that I found in this, as I was learning about this story, I want to share with you a picture of Helmuth Hübener. Have you guys ever heard of this person? Helmuth Hübener, youngest person ever killed by the Nazi regime. That's a picture of that young boy. So as I was learning about this story, I called one of my sons over, Camden. He's 15, and I said, "Have you ever heard of this guy, this kid, Helmuth Hübener?" And my son was like, "No, I haven't." I said, "Learn about him, read about him." So he starts looking him up and reading about him, and he's like, "Wow, this is crazy." The other thing about Helmuth Hübener was not only was he going against the Nazi regime, but his local ecclesiastical leader was in fact a Nazi. I read that most of the members of his church were not, but his leader was. And so also what happened is Helmuth ended up getting excommunicated by his church for these activities. Now think about that for just a moment. A 17-year-old kid, imagine you, like whatever age you are, imagine that you find out that there is truth that needs to be shared, but you know that the truth that you're sharing could not only be going against your entire government with the powers, the great powers and military force and might that your government has, but also that even your local community, your church community could abandon you for doing this. Imagine the courage that would have taken to stand on the side of truth. So in any case, I'm telling my son about this, and my son made this comment. He said, "Well," I said, "what would you do in that situation? What would you do? Would you stand up for truth? Would you try to do something about it?" And he's like, "Well, he goes, "I don't think so." He's like, "I might just keep my mouth shut and not risk my life." And I said, "Well, what if you noticed that, A, Jewish people were not being allowed into the church, but then B, Jewish people were being mistreated, and eventually we all know what happened, the atrocities that happened in the war, which I don't know if they were happening at the time that Helmuth was going through this story. I do know that he was for a time a member of what was called Hitler's Youth, which was like a youth group. So apparently Helmuth was in the Boy Scouts. There were Boy Scouts in Germany, but then the Boy Scouts got outlawed, and then all the youth were forced to go into this program called Hitler's Youth. And one of the things that they did that Helmuth was around during this time is I forget what it was called, but they went out and destroyed Jewish businesses, smashed the windows, broke down the doors, lit things on fire. And so this was happening at that time. So I'm posing this question to my son, and he's kind of pushing back, like, I don't know, risk your life, risk everything to speak for truth and stand on what's right. And then my son said this, and this is where I think the hidden lesson from History's Forgotten Hero comes in. My son said, well, what good did it do? What good did it do? He ended up dying. He lost his life. His two friends that were helping him both got sentenced to, I believe, 5 to 10 years in a prison. And then the war happened. The Holocaust happened. All of that happened. So my son's looking at this Helmuth Hübener, looking at his act of courage, looking at him not only risking, but sacrificing his very life to stand on the side of truth, but then asking the question, what good did it do? Because did it affect the war? It didn't seem like it affected the war. Did it stop the Holocaust? No, it didn't stop the Holocaust. So even though he was being courageous and speaking, it didn't seem to have an overall positive effect. So my son, what a legitimate question, right? What a legitimate question. What good would it do? Maybe it's better to just keep your mouth shut and not stand on the side of courage and truth. I'm going to check the comments here. Nick says, that's some scary stuff and risky, but when you are in that situation, you have to give it a shot. I mean, it's a really hard thing, right? Like, I like to think that I would do what Helmuth did, but would I really? When you think about your spouse, your kids, all of your material possessions, your safety, your peace, would you really have the courage? I don't know. I like to say that I would. I would want to think that I would be one of those people, but I don't know that any one of us actually knows what we would do without being put into that specific scenario. Veronique says, yes, indeed. We're feeling that way. Veronique says, knowing something that must be shared, but that's not what the authorities think and follow. And Nick says, it empowers others to rise up. So that's a good point. And this really, for me, is the hidden lesson in this story. What good did it do? Well, as we look back over history now, here I am in 2023 learning about this courageous boy and this act of complete courage and in standing for what he believed to be the truth. There was a last letter that he wrote where he talked about, Danny says, I have a lot of courage, but I don't know, right? Like, we really don't know. But his last letter, one of the last letters that he wrote, he talked about his faith in God. And he said, I know that God is just. This was his deathbed letter, the last thing that he wrote. And it was something like, I know that I have faith in God, and God is just, and that's where he put his faith. So he chose to do what he thought that God would want him to do, even though he was going to sacrifice his life. And so here I am in 2023 learning about this story and sharing it with you guys. I would love to encourage you to learn about this boy. There's a documentary on YouTube that's free to watch. Maybe I'll find it and post the link in the comments. So fascinating to learn about this kid. And I think there are other lessons in this story as well, besides this one that I'm going to highlight. I would love to ask you, what are the lessons so far that you think we can draw from this story? Are there practical lessons that we can draw from this story to utilize in our daily lives? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. But here's the hidden lesson that I find, is that even though his direct actions didn't seem to have an effect on the immediate circumstance, his story and his actions and his courage are having an effect in 2023 on me and maybe on you as you learn about his story. As I learn about his story, I'm being inspired with courage. I'm being inspired by what he did. I'm being inspired by the importance of of preserving free speech. Because that's the other thing that I think is really relevant to this story, is that Helmuth, he hoped that by using his voice, he could cause some sort of an organic uprising that might stop the Nazis. Now, the Nazis, one of their greatest fears was that if the truth got out, there would be an organic uprising. And that's why they had such strict rules against speech. And they didn't want people to be able to speak the truth. So they had these strict rules where we'll kill you. You know, if you speak something that's true but is against our official narrative, we will literally kill you. Why? Because they were afraid that the truth getting out might stop their agenda. So in 2023, as I'm reading this, I'm looking back and I'm thinking about this, and I'm asking myself, what good did it do? The same question that my son asked me. Well, the good that it did, just like all of the courageous leaders throughout history. Socrates is another example. We read about Socrates' story in the book Think and Grow Rich today. You can catch the replay if you visit growrichmastermind.com and learn about our daily call. There's a great story in the book Think and Grow Rich about Socrates, where Socrates, 2,000 years ago or more, I don't remember exactly when Socrates lived, but he was forced to drink a cup of poison because he would not renounce the questioning that he had done against the authorities of the time in ancient Greece. They labeled him a heretic. They said, we're going to kill you. They said, renounce what you've said. Take it back, and then you won't have to die. And Socrates chose instead to drink the cup of poison and to be on the side of his truth and what he believed to be right. He sacrificed his life. So just like that story, you look back and you say, what good did it do? Socrates died. They killed him. Helmuth died. They killed him. The Holocaust happened anyway. What good did it do? Well, we have these stories still living in our collective consciousness. And these stories, I think, serve, when we remember them and when we champion them, they serve to inspire us like stars in the sky of history, that standing for truth, standing for what is right, standing for your moral character is a good thing to do. Now, hopefully, none of us has to be forced to sacrifice our lives for what we believe. However, I do think that on a daily basis, if you're building a business or leading a family or, doing whatever it is that you're doing to provide for yourself, we are required to utilize our courage in doing whatever it is that we need to do to move those things forward. And another place that I think this relates is that when you look back over Helmuth's story and you say, okay, what good did it do? And we're talking about the good that it did, inspiration. I want to relate this to, creating content. If you're creating content and you create a video or a piece of an article that you write or an email that you write and you don't get a sale or you don't get a lead and you say, what good did it do? We have to look deeper in the good that it does. The fact of you showing up and doing your marketing, you have no idea who you're inspiring with your example, just like Helmuth did. So sometimes I think the good that we think we're going to do in living in courage and walking in faith might not be the good we think is going to be accomplished. However, there is often much other good that's accomplished that we might not even be aware of. And I think that's the case with being courageous in our businesses and being courageous in our daily lives. So I wanted to share that with you guys. That's a super inspiring story for me. I cannot believe that I've never heard of this kid's name, Helmuth Hübener. I believe his name deserves to go down in the annals of history. I think kids should know about Helmuth. I think we as adults should know about him and what he did. And I don't think he should be forgotten in the pages of history's past. So hopefully today's live can serve a little bit to that end. Check the comments here. Your mind says, glad you were talking about this man. Proud of you. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Happy to do so. Veronique says, when you know what the governments from all countries are keeping hidden, you stand alone against such a high position, then it's difficult. Yeah, and guys, I want to make it clear that I'm not advocating that wherever we're at, that we go rage against the machine and we, do what Helmuth did. Because, and here's the thing, like one of the things that I've questioned as I've learned about this story is I say, Paul, what about you? You know, has your voice been as powerful and as vocal as Helmuth's in the face of forces who seem to be endeavoring to silence my speech and the speech of my fellow countrymen and my fellow members of humanity? Like, where have you been in this struggle? You know, and in some ways, I'm kind of disappointed in myself. You know, that because I have some like conflicting things inside of me. Like, I want to, as much as I can, use my voice in a way where it will actually have an effect on people and their businesses and their lives and kind of like move the needle. And so I notice that complaining about politics all the time, I don't know that has quite the effect that some people might want it to have. And so, you know, I choose for the most part to not really delve into politics and things like that. And so the point though is, as I've reflected in myself on Helmuth Hübener's story and asked myself, can I do better? Should I do better? What are there areas where I might want to speak more about? I'm reminded of this phrase that I heard that describes wisdom. And I forget who said it, but it's something to the effect of, wisdom is not something that can be taught. If one has wisdom, they have it, but it's not something that can be taught. What does that even mean? Well, in this particular example, I think what it means is that there are so many distinctions in any person's life, so many details, so many different things going on, that in some cases, it's hard to say, hey, Nick, if you want to do what Helmuth did, you should do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and that's the protocol. It's like, no, wisdom does not have a protocol. It doesn't have a step-by-step thing that you should do in every situation that pops up. So a lot of this, I think, is like on-the-job training and on-the-job decisions where we use everything that's been poured into us and we handle things as they come up. So anyway, that was just a random thought, Veronique, that you inspired that I wanted to highlight. We kind of have to make our own decisions as we're navigating this life journey. And, be courageous, though. Be courageous. Follow your heart. And I think we'll be guided in the right way. So anyway, that's my story. I wanted to share that with you guys. Hope you got value from it. Share this video if you think others deserve to hear the story of Helmuth Hübener. And if you enjoyed this content and want more from me, I would love to encourage you to subscribe to me on social media, wherever you're finding this. And then also, one of the ways that I feel like I have been courageous is I co-founded a company 6 years ago. And part of the reason that I co-founded the company that I did was because I want to be the change that I wish to see in the world. And so on the positive side of forces that seem to be against freedom, on the positive side of that, I believe that I can be a champion for freedom. I can be a champion for the ideals and the principles that lead to freedom. I can be a champion for developing strong moral character within myself. And in that journey, I can do the best that I can to inspire others to also continue to develop strong moral character. And for me, that's kind of my crusade, to help people be free, to help people be self-reliant, to help people grow an income where their income is not dependent on their political views or things they may or may not want to say. I think that freedom is a positive corollary to the Helmuth Hübener story. And so rather than, focus so much on the negative side of things, which we could do, and there are plenty of people who are doing that, we can choose to focus on the positive side of things and be a champion for freedom and be a champion for helping ourselves and others become more independent, become more influential, become more persuasive in our communication. These are all skills that can be developed as we set the goal to go for financial freedom, and then we do what we need to do to build that in our lives. So that's a little bit behind the reasoning of why I co-founded the company that I did. And so all of that to say that if you want to check that company out and be on the positive side of building freedom, I would love to encourage you to do that. You can visit myfreedomfamily.com and learn about the business model that we created to strive to help be the change in the world and empower and inspire more freedom and as many people as we can. So that's myfreedomfamily.com. Also, you'll be subscribing to my email list, so you'll get content from me like this and more future content, and be sure to not miss out. So that's it, guys. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks to everyone who commented below. Thanks to everyone who has liked or shared this video. I really appreciate it, and I hope you get out there, take action, go for your dreams, and I'll catch you in a future episode of The Good Parts. Take care, and bye for now.